Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading Alan Ryan's On Politics, a book describing the history of political theory from Herodotus to the modern day. And this time we are looking at Rousseau, a very interesting character, kind of a really weird dude, but has some interesting theories that I partly agree with, partly disagree with, I think, for the most part. I don't know. What do you think overall? It was a very long chapter. It's over like 40 pages long, but it was an interesting read.
Yes. Um, we were talking before the podcast started about how he had all these kids, then gave them up to the Foundling Hospital, 5 children with his ultimately the gal he married after, I guess, sleeping around with various women for a long period of time. And the mortality rate was somewhere near 90% for
Yeah.
the foundlings sent there. I mean, that just seems almost unbelievable. Like, how can you still have a foundling hospital, and who would drop their children off? Well, evidently Rousseau.
Martin Rousseau, yeah.
There's a lot of overlap between him and Marx. Marx let his children starve to death. So, but it was probably just society that made him do that. It wasn't their fault. It was the government and the state society pressures that caused them to be horrible people.
Yes, exactly. We'll get into that a little bit later. But starting off,
foreshadowing.
Yeah, foreshadowing. Thank you for that. Starting off with Rousseau's life and times, he was born in Geneva on June 28th, 1712, and his mother died only days after his birth, leading to a series of emotional issues throughout his life, or so Alan Ryan says. His father was an anti-aristocratic watchmaker, and the ruling council of Geneva took Rousseau's works in his later life to be a coded assault against the council, and so they had them burned and resolved to have Rousseau arrested if he ever set foot in Geneva again. So he was, at one point in time, never welcome back in his city of birth. But he had already left the city for some good time before this, and had never really had a true career, but drifted from place to place. He reached Paris in 1741, where he met Diderot and became acquainted with other enlightened writers. He met Therese Levasseur in Paris in 1745, who he finally married in 1766 and had 5 children with. And as you mentioned, he sent all of these children to the Foundling Hospital, which was practically infanticide, as the mortality rate there was more than 90%. And after publishing The Social Contract in 1762, he led a very uneasy life because just about every government in the world was kind of hating him at this point. And he was angering the authorities just about everywhere he went. He even refused to live in England, even though Hume had personally invited him there, but he was kind of paranoid about this and thought it was a trap, and so rejected that invitation. And he became very mentally ill by the end of the 1760s. I'm going to read here a little bit from the book. He says, the French authorities eventually realized that Rousseau was in no position to trouble anyone, and a tacit bargain was struck in 1770 that allowed him and Therese to live quietly outside Paris under the protection of the Prince de Conti, whose family had long supported him. He died in 1778, leaving as one of his legacies the Confessions, published in 1782, and as another a permanently altered European sensibility. Loathed by conservatives such as Edmund Burke and Joseph de Maistre, he was distrusted by radicals such as Karl Marx, but ideas that were original with him are now so much part of our intellectual equipment that it's impossible to imagine ourselves without them. So kind of hated by everyone, just about. Nobody really liked Rousseau, but his ideas were very influential. A lot of people drew on his ideas, mostly kind of, it seems like, picking and choosing which parts of Rousseau they like and which parts they don't like, because everybody has a problem with one or another of his theories, just about.
Yes, and I'm always frustrated when people say, well, I must be doing something right. The people of the left and the right both hate me. They all hate me, these, extremes. Maybe you're just a jerk. Have you considered that? Maybe they're all right and that you're just a jerk. But no, Rousseau had some interesting ideas and certainly worth considering, and inspired the horrible French Revolution in part.
Yes, absolutely.
And the philosophy behind Robespierre.
Yes, awful
Ill-fated
person.
murderer.
Yes, of course. We do not like Robespierre here. But here we get into Rousseau and revolution. He says reputation and reality. Here, Alan Ryan kind of, describes the differences between how Rousseau is perceived and how he was in reality. He says it is widely believed that Rousseau's ideas had brought about the greatest political and social upheaval since the 16th and 17th century wars of religion. He says Rousseau was in fact opposed to revolution. His political ideas were classical, and his template for his political institutions were Roman. So he's very much opposed to revolution, although a lot of people claimed him as credit for, starting revolutions later. And he was very hostile to the society that the French revolutionaries strove to create. And he articulated the ideals that animated radicals from the 1760s to today. So even though he hated, or would have hated what he would have seen as the French government at that point, he still set forth some of those ideals that they used to start that revolution.
True.
He does say
Also,
that
it was kind of shocking how talented he was in various
Mhm,
areas. I think he wrote was it an opera or is it a
mhm.
symphony? I'm trying to
It was an
remember.
opera, yeah.
And evidently well received. I
Mhm.
didn't know that about him.
Yeah. He also mentions he kind of wrote the very first novel, and that kind
Yeah,
of, spurned, the every other novel to ever exist was,
right.
can kind of be traced back to that, which is interesting.
A romantic novel.
Yes, romantic novel. Yes,
Mhm,
correct.
mhm.
He also sided with the Enlightenment ideals of rationality and politics governed by impersonal and impartial law, but this was kind of undermined by his emphasis on the quirky, individual, unsociable aspects of human nature. So he thought, everything should kind of be impersonal based on reason and rationality, but then he also kind of mentions that humans are really weird and are bad at following rationality. So he kind of is at odds with himself at some points. But the biggest thing he did is he analyzed the human condition as a social condition. And in this, he kind of removed the idea of original sin from human nature and says that imperfections on humanity are the result of social, not natural causes. He says he saw humans as clay in the hands of society. And then with this idea, there are three works that are central. First, the discourses on the origin of inequality, which is sort of his social history describing, how man came to be, formed by society. The social contract, which sets out the conditions for legitimate authority and requirements for society, and Emile, which was an educational book describing the process for an individual to become a citizen of a lawful republic. So those are the three works we're going to be looking at here, summarized anyway.
And that seminal thought that there is no original sin, that basically we're pure
Mm-hmm.
animals if left to our own devices without society, sounds really good, and there's a lot of logic to that. But I'm sure we're going to see in future chapters, or if you study history,
Mm-hmm.
it's really a dangerous concept because it really pulls. I mean, it's similar to some wrong-headed ideas of original sin,
Yeah.
but in that they would try to absolve the individual of responsibility for the problems in their lives, or the sins
Mm-hmm.
and the mistakes, because you can say if we were left to our own devices, we'd be pure as a driven snow. It's just the fault of this corrupting society
Mm-hmm.
that bad things have happened, or I've done bad things even.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could see that you can justify anything to enact a government which would then cause everyone to be good,
Mm-hmm.
because that's possible in theory, and also you're absolved from all responsibility for how terrible you are, or
Mm-hmm.
how terrible you're acting, because it's really society's fault. And
Yeah.
we see that to the present day in an individual, especially
Mm-hmm.
the criminal justice system, but in civil litigation, everything, any sort of disputes, that type of philosophy that, oh, I'm just a creation of other outside
Mm-hmm.
pressures. And I don't know that he's really saying that
Yeah.
explicitly, but that type of philosophy and people that have expounded on it has really been very
Mm-hmm.
destructive, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think I agree with it to an extent. Like, I think we are very much shaped by the environment that we're in, but the environment that we're in does not cause us to do the things that we do. Like, it has influence on us, but it does not it is not responsible for our actions, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people are confused by what original sin is, because you can
Mm-hmm.
take the opposite thing. Well, if we're all born sinners, and do we have any fault for doing bad things? We're
Mm-hmm.
created that way.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of alluding to before.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that would absolve individuals of their responsibility for whatever they do or the
Mm-hmm.
choices they make, then I don't buy that. And I think it's destructive, because
Mm-hmm.
you have to have responsibility for the things that you have control over.
Mm-hmm. True.
Which is really the one thing you have control over, is what you do, what you think, and what you say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We then move into Rousseau's discovery of human evolution. And so this was a very big thing for Rousseau because he situated modern politics in an evolutionary framework. He kind of claimed that although there must be something primordial and original in the human constitution that allows cultures to create people, our original nature is lost. He says, we can never really get back to what we were sort of meant to be, or what we were originally. He says he raises the question about which possibilities for human progress are closed off and which can be seized. how far can we mold infants into adults who can do good and be rational, moral, and happy? He's kind of saying, we've gotten so far in society, we've kind of made people as they are now. How can we make anybody good in the society that we have? And there's an interesting quote here from the book. He says, whether we control the educational process or not, society will equip us with some character rather than none, and will teach us some things and not others. But if the process is not intelligently controlled or not controlled for some serious moral purpose, it may produce anything. Rousseau complained that his own society created the vain, other-regarding, self-indulgent creatures who populated 18th century Paris. To create men with the virtues of the Spartans and Romans and without their weaknesses would take a heroic effort. So he was very much into sort of the education approach. How can we shape people to be good people? What part of the process does society have there, and things like that, which I think there is still an element of truth there. And that, what you are taught, especially in early education and stuff, is very formational and things like that. And I think that's still a question that's being discussed today for sure.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking of in that excerpt, actually Josh Hammer, because he would agree with that, because Rousseau's saying you have to have some sort of educational philosophy or outcome goal, because nothing's value neutral. And I think Josh Hammer would agree with that. You can't, if you're saying you're value neutral, you're really espousing a certain values, some over the others of complete freedom or discretion or whatever the case may be. So it's kind of interesting to see both sides of it. And this in a summary of Rousseau, and the other one in a speech from pretty interesting thinker, Josh Hammer.
Absolutely. Rousseau also did not believe in progress. He didn't deny that change could improve the human condition, but he believed that we had failed to reap the benefits of our skills and capacities and had turned them into disadvantages. We'll get more into this later, but he believed that change was more of a threat than a benefit. And he favored stability, simplicity, and order over progress, which is an idea that I think I kind of agree with. I've been thinking about this a lot, but I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, but I think there's a very prominent idea now that whatever is new is automatically better. Whatever is old is automatically bad. We can't listen to those ideas because they were written 300 years ago, et cetera. But here's this new thing that this person is saying, and it's like, well, this is so much better because it's new. So I think I would agree with Rousseau there a little bit, just in the idea that, progress isn't inherently good. I think our lives are much better today than they were 300 years ago, but I don't know if ideas and values and morality and stuff like that has really improved.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it kind of follows with his philosophy as it's described, that he didn't believe that, like the old saying, every cloud has a silver lining. And Rousseau's attitude was, well, the silver lining just highlighted the blackness of the cloud. I was like, well, that's an interesting way to look at it. It kind of flows into this change isn't necessarily good. It's likely bad. And why don't you just appreciate what you have instead of trying to change it all the time?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it does support the theory that he wasn't by temperament necessarily a revolutionary, or even some of his theories, but they ended up becoming revolutionary thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Then move into the discourses on the origin of inequality among men. So the first of the three important works we're looking at here. And he wrote this essay as a prize essay for the Academy of Dijon in 1754. It was a successor to an earlier essay he had written, The Discourse on the Arts and Sciences. And this work attacked the growth of knowledge's effect on our morals and character. He kind of contrasted the brave, honest, loyal, public-spirited ancients versus the feeble, dishonest, treacherous, and selfish modern people. So again, that idea of, we're much worse off now than we were, hundreds of years ago. But this
didn't he not abide by the word limit? Sounds like somebody I know that's on this podcast that would overperform, and they didn't even read the whole thing. They stopped reading. So this is too long. You're violating.
The discourses on the origin of inequality was twice as long as the limit, and the judges stopped reading. They refused to read past that. But his earlier essay had made Rousseau famous, but it was heavily criticized for its assault on human reason and not really offering any solutions. He was kind of just complaining about things without, saying what we can do better. But it was unique because of its acute sense of the contradictory impulses that socialization gives us. He kind of comes up with this idea that we are tormented by our own wickedness, which we'll get into later. But the discourses on the origin of inequality kind of accepted Hobbes's view that the state exists to prevent a civil war among humanity, but Rousseau differs from Hobbes in saying that human nature is not the problem. Hobbes kind of said, at human nature, we're all, at war with each other. That's just an inevitable thing. Rousseau thought the opposite. He says Hobbes is really describing civilized human nature, but we must ask what humanity must have been when first on Earth before we were civilized people. He says, Hobbes gets it right partially, but we can go even further than what Hobbes was describing.
Yeah, I don't know where he I don't follow. I mean, I understand what he's saying, but I don't agree with any of that.
Yeah.
That we are if we weren't civilized, we would just be peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we'd be in his theory, be far less populous, so we wouldn't see each other that often. But I would view it as like two grizzly bears stumbling upon each other in the wild, and almost every animal has territorial
Yeah.
claims in the state of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would just be violent. And then he also talks. I think it's later in the chapter where like how humans are different than other animals because the child rearing, the child has to stay with at least the mother
Mm-hmm.
for some period of time. And so it seems like if the state of nature, you're going to have at least family units, and so
Yeah.
then you have extended family units because of the length of time to grow to maturity. And so I don't know what he's thinking about, like
Mm-hmm.
the lone man in the woods, and
Yeah.
you're going to be in a peaceful state of nature. No, you're going to be there with your clan,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to keep your clan safe. It's just going to be like monkeys, in the
Yeah.
jungle. You get two troops of monkeys happen upon each other. It's violent, like chimpanzees. Like, eat your
Mm-hmm.
face off.
Well, he was obsessed with orangutans, and this is kind of his theory. His theory is that natural man, truly natural man, not civilized natural man, different things. Truly natural man would be more like an orangutan than the modern people of today. So his idea is that truly natural man is innocent but not virtuous, but he does possess two powerful instincts: amour de soi, which is care for oneself, and pitié, or the instinctive revulsion of suffering of other members of its species. And he says these two things are shared with all animals.
I
What
don't know
makes
that. Do you think that humans have a natural revulsion, instinctive revulsion at the suffering of other
Mhm.
members of the species? I don't know that that's true. I think we have a natural revulsion to the suffering of people within our group.
Mm, yeah.
But I don't. Maybe he would say that's societal pressures or something. But I think
Hmm.
we're such social animals. I think, like if you watch a video of some um, person, falling over on, like skateboarding, and they
Hmm.
had a crotch shot or something. It's kind of funny, and as long as it's not me.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody that I know, ooh, that's not good. I don't like that. But I don't know that he do. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we have more of that idea than I think some other animals do, but I think there's a lot of animals out there that don't have that at all. Like I think there's a bunch of animals that would willingly eat each other, if they happen to come across each other, like you're saying, they're very
Yeah,
territorial and things like that. I think we're better about it than a lot of other animals, but I don't think it's just inherent. We are instinctively revolted by
yeah,
suffering of other people.
yeah. And if you look at other, I mean, there's examples and probably counterexamples. I'm not a, I don't know what you call it, an animal behavioralist. But I don't know much about orangutans or why you
Mm.
pick them. I guess they look human-like.
Well, there was the theory
Um,
at the time that it was like the missing
as an
link
incentive.
between,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
humans and
But
apes.
like, you see videos all the time of like a dog that gets sick or something, and the other
Hmm.
dogs are tending to it as much as they can, or elephants that appear to have
Mm.
sorrow for another elephant that passes. Where they appear to be very human-like or almost like emotional. And so I don't know that makes us so much different, and I don't know that I
Yeah.
buy. I think if anything, because of our rational nature, we may not have that type of instinctual
Mm.
revulsion at the suffering of our own kind.
Yeah.
I think history belies that point with how much violence and destruction there has been
Yeah.
in human history, for it to be a natural revulsion for
Hmm.
any human suffering just instinctively. I
Mm.
don't know that's not a good thing to base a foundation of a
Yeah.
theory of human development. I don't
Mhm.
think.
Well, what he says is sort of the idea of human development is the unique thing about humans, which is this perfectibility, which is
Yeah,
different than the pity that all animals have. But it's this idea. It doesn't mean perfectibility, but this idea of
right,
developability or unfinishedness. And he says that humans have very long periods of immaturity, where we're
right.
constantly learning and changing, and the species itself changes. He says apes live the same way today that they did 10,000 years ago. We've invented agriculture, commerce, industry, literacy. So he's kind of saying, this is what is different. We have some innate desire to develop. We have this innate ability to grow in a way.
I agree with that, but I don't think we're so much different. I
Mm.
think we just have more resources and more leisure time. But when it really comes down to it, if you get two people in an alley and it's like two men enter and one man leaves, there's going to be violence. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's put to you,
Mm.
somebody's but it doesn't have to be that way. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's I don't I am in agreement with a lot of classicists who believe that the human nature has not changed at all
Mm.
in the entire human history.
Yeah.
What we've changed is our knowledge and our
Mm-hmm.
leisure and our ability to communicate and to build upon prior generations' use of tools but as far as us as individuals and our capacity and our morality, that we are the same.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I don't think, I mean, a person from 2000 years ago, I think has a similar, moral foundation as we do. Like, I don't think we've like evolved in such a way that we're now just infinitely more moral people. It's like what I was saying earlier, just because they're old doesn't mean they're bad anymore. We're just
Right.
automatically better because we're new. I very much
Truth.
disagree with that. Uh,
Yes.
but he goes on to say that in the original state, we are like all other animals, wanting just what will do us good. We have no sense of identity, time, or fear of death. And this idea of pity ensures that we do not just attack other humans. We are very tranquil beings, free from anxiety and suffering, which I think is not true at all. I think if we were just like every other animal, we would be killing each other outright. And I think I mean, I think I
Yeah.
can't get behind this. I think he's just saying things pretty much.
And our ability to remember and communicate actually increases our anxiety
Mm,
because we're more aware of the past and of the potential future than I think a
hmm.
lot of animals are,
Yeah.
because they're more in the moment, I guess you'd say,
Hmm.
uh, or at least I assume they are. It's hard to know what the dog is thinking, uh, but sometimes you take a good guess,
Hmm.
and they seem to be more in the moment than we are. And I think that we'd be much more anxious as early men before
Hmm.
real societies. But
Yeah.
we're such a social creature.
Hmm.
I think he's wrong about the foundation is wrong because we're just like we're so social. We're like bees, most
Hmm.
like it's down to our core.
Yeah.
And like if you read any of the behavioral psychologists, especially like, or even the popular or more prominent people like Jordan Peterson talks about a lot about that stuff. Like there's some things that are just so hardwired into us.
Hmm.
Um, it's hard for us to get that hierarchy, that sense of trying to improve yourself and your status within the group, and it's just there's so much of that that's just ingrained in us that we can't really help. We have to
Hmm.
acknowledge it and try to overcome it.
Hmm.
But to say we would just be peaceful
Hmm.
farmers living in a plane by ourselves or just with just a few people is like absurd.
Yeah. Well, he goes on to say that we developed society because of increased population. So as our population grew, this put stress on our resources, and so we needed social organization and language to develop the appropriate skills and arrangements to survive. So it's very much a survival-based thing. The only reason we came together was because we had limited resources. But he does
I don't
make
go
an
against
interesting,
that either
yeah.
because the as the population grew you had more capability to delegate certain tasks to other people.
Hmm.
If you have to provide for yourself and your family just by yourself with no assistance from any other human, it is more than a full-time job. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible. And the mortality rate was so much because I mean, you didn't have the assistance of other people. But as you get, I mean, at some point, you have diminishing resources, but
Hmm.
you have so much more efficiencies of scale
Yeah.
where you could have one person farming and the other person making tools and another,
Hmm.
I mean, so I don't buy the premise of that either.
Yeah, I think he's got it like almost backwards. Like I think you're saying similar things in that, increased population um, also came with, increased organization. But he's kind of saying the increased population, you know, kind of as a negative effect, created, this social organization. But you're kind of saying, it's very much a positive thing. It's
Right.
not just because we were, so low on resources and we were starving. And then, with increased population just naturally led to that positively to have that increased organization, things like that.
Right. Because if you look at human history, as the population, the Industrial Revolution changed everything, of course.
Hmm.
But he was in that time,
Yeah.
that era, I guess, the beginning. But I mean, we have how many more billions of people now than they had then, and we have more food and more
Hmm.
resources, which is almost unbelievable, but it is
Yeah.
true. And so I mean, he just happens to be wrong.
He does make some interesting points about the origin of language, which I really liked,
Oh,
of
did
course,
you?
because linguistics. But he says the origin of language is inexplicable. He says the burden of creating language likely falls on the infant, kind of drawing on, who would make language. It's kind of a communication between the mother and the child, but the child takes priority there in creating the language as he has the greater need to make his wants known. You don't agree?
No,
Mm, why
no.
not?
At a very basic level, you teach the kid
Mm,
how to communicate. Like we taught you boys sign language, little baby sign
yeah.
language. Before you could speak, you could tell us whether you're hungry, whether you're
Hmm.
thirsty. I'm doing the hand motions
Yeah.
for our viewer.
Hmm.
And what was the other one? Oh, read a book.
Mm,
So you could do the book, the little sign, like opening a book.
mm.
And so that was all initiated by the parents. And so when you say that language is initiated by a child, that's just stupid. Of course, it was initiated
Uh,
by the adults.
I don't know. I don't know about that
You
one.
think that the child is initiating language?
I don't know if the child is responsible for the creation of language. I don't know if I agree with him there, but I do think the child has more credit there than what you're giving because language change and language creation is like 99% of the time driven by kids. Um, this is a
Oh, you're
thing.
talking about creating new words in the language,
No, I mean
like
creating. Okay,
slang
no, no, no,
terms
no, no, no,
and
no,
all
no, no, no,
that.
no, 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 no. No, that is not what I'm saying. In communities where you have multiple languages spoken, essentially, new languages formed called Creole languages, depending on their stage of development, that are essentially a mix of three different languages or what have you. But it's always driven by the kids. It's never the adults who are speaking these languages at first, of course, once these kids grow up. But we've documented this. It starts with the children and Creole languages all across the world from different, languages coming together that have no relation to each other. They follow similar like grammatical structures. They follow, similar, syntax structures and things like that. Um, but they're entirely separate languages. And so the idea is that there is something innate in children that might be lost in adults as we mature. That is like a natural language forming process, and it's just driven by need to communicate with each other across language barriers.
But first, there's language.
But first, there's language. But I think the point
And then
is,
you're
I
talking about mixing a language or learning the language.
yes, but
No,
I could see
oh
where
wait,
Rousseau is.
wait. Our brains process language a certain way. So of
Hmm,
course, the kids created it. Is that
I
what you're
could
saying?
see. I
Is
can
that
see
what?
where Rousseau is coming from, is what I'm saying, because I can see what he's thinking is, if you have a child there and you know that a child makes a certain noise, that means he wants milk, then you're going to give him milk, right? Or
No,
food or whatever. No.
say milk.
But if you
Hey,
don't have
stupid.
language yet, I think it's more likely for the child to be driving that than the adult.
No, because the adult would be like, "What do you want?" They say, "You want this water? You want this?"
But the adult can't say anything. If we're talking about creating language, the adult has nothing.
The language already existed.
What? Then
Yes,
where did language come from in the first place? That's what we're talking about. How was
an
language created?
adult, an adult, an adult had
Why?
because a baby or a child does not understand the concept of language.
But you just said you taught us sign language.
Yeah, because we taught it to you.
I'm not saying the child is creating like a whole language. Like he's not like 2 months old and speaking full complex English. I
Because
think what
the
Rousseau is saying, what
adult,
I'm saying is
oh, yeah.
that, when a child makes a noise and you can attribute that noise to a certain want, that is the basis of communication and of probably language further on.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So you think that these babies lived in a bubble until they started making noises and pointing at stuff? There's communication from the parents from
Hmm.
before they are born. They
Hmm.
can hear this stuff,
Hmm.
and then as soon as they're born, the parents are facing them and talking to them
But we're
and
talking
encouraging
about a
them.
world without language.
When did that occur? That there is language Bees have language.
No, they do not.
Ants have language.
No,
They
they do
have
not.
ways to communicate.
They have ways
Yeah.
to communicate. They don't have language.
But what I'm saying is that in that basic level, almost every animal has some sort of way to communicate by either gestures, noises, grunts, whatever.
Hmm.
And so that existed before humans had language. So
Sure.
whatever we were before we had language, we had those things.
Sure. Sure.
And so that's where it came from. So I mean, it's kind of a chicken and the egg at
Hmm.
some point, but I don't think any child was going to be able to say or able to establish a language and teach the adults. Well, this means that.
Well, they don't have to teach the adults. They have to talk with the other kids,
Oh
and then they
Lord,
just become the adults.
yes, yeah,
Yes.
because that's what they would normally do is just let the little infants run around by themselves. Which actually, I guess they would, but
Yeah, probably.
yeah.
But back to the book. There was a nice quote that I wanted
So wait a
to
second. I
read
want
you.
you to acknowledge I was right.
You
Then
are
you were
right
wrong.
that communication exists, among adults. I think that is true, but I do still think that children do drive the creation of language.
Creation of new languages after a language existed.
I don't agree with that.
Well, then you're wrong.
All right. But he says here on page 545, Rousseau makes some shrewd observations about the sheer unlikelihood that anyone could have invented terms for abstract entities without having in their minds thoughts that would themselves depend on their possessing the language in which to express them. As he says, the power of speech appears to have been quite necessary in order to establish the use of speech. Um, and I think that's very much true. I think there is definitely a contradiction there, and I think that's why we'll never agree on an answer. And I think that's also why you look at me like that, but I think that's also kind of one of the reasons I think there is something um, somewhat divine about language. I think that there is some outside influence there because I don't see it just springing up from nowhere.
There's a lot of theories about like aliens.
Mm,
That's the big thing. They came here and somehow gave us something or intermingled with us, and that's when that kind of like bridge over there. But I do agree with the theory that there had to be the capacity for language before language existed.
yes. Hmm.
I completely agree with that. But it wasn't some 3-year-old telling an adult, what for.
He goes on to say that the arrivals of language, reason, and self consciousness coincide. He says, reason turns self love and pity into moral sentiments. It generalizes our own principles into commands addressed to ourselves and to everyone else. He also says, with language came the ability to generalize across space, time, and individuals, but with morality also came guilt and shame. As moral standards created new vulnerabilities, we now suffer the agonies of guilt and self condemnation, suffering not just pain, but also moral resentment. And that's kind of why he hates society and says we should go back to being monkeys, is because, now everything's so much more complex. Before language and before everything, we were so much happier and so much more peaceful. Now I have to feel guilty when I do bad things, and that's society's fault.
There's a lot of truth to that.
You
I
think
mean, a
so?
lot of truth to that observation or regret that it would have
Mm,
been, sometimes it's better to if we didn't have the choice.
mm,
If we
yeah,
didn't have free will,
everything would
and
be a lot simpler.
it wasn't aware that and weren't aware that we didn't have free will,
Hmm.
would that be kind of like ignorance is bliss
Yeah.
theory? If we don't know those things, we wouldn't miss it, and we wouldn't worry about it because
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
whether we'd still be hungry and be worried. I think
Yeah.
there'd be some worry about basic needs, that type of thing.
Hmm.
But
He then goes on to outline some stages of human development, and Alan Ryan kind of makes the point that now we look at pre-industrialization and industrialization, but he kind of says well, it's very different for people in Rousseau's time and earlier, because they're comparing essentially the people of their day with the Roman citizens, kind of the post-Roman and then pre-Roman or during the Roman times. But he contrasted the sturdy freeholder who was the foundation of Roman liberty with the servile trader of the current time, with the oppressed peasant under feudal obligations. So again, that idea of going back to the Romans would be a better idea, because after the Romans we had the feudal system, and then now in Rousseau's time you have all these traders and these merchants who are not happy under landlords and things like that. So very similar to Marx in a strange way there, kind of arguing and we'll get into this more here, where he claims the creator of private property was the founder of civil society and the begetter of all of our ills. corn and iron civilized man and ruined humanity, or so he says. He says, although agriculture produced great benefits, it trapped mankind in drudgery. New divisions also arose between those who performed labor and those who owned the land. Very much just, foundational Marxist theory there. Of course, Marx even says he was inspired by Rousseau. He says, we also crave admiration and the good opinions of others in this modern world. And the modern man wants the good approval of everyone, and so needs absolute control over them to get that good opinion, and therefore has dictatorial tendencies. That's kind of where he says, he says, I'm going to read from the book, but as Plato argued in Republic, dictators have created innumerable enemies and are permanently terrified that their enemies will kill them. The only remedy is to kill all one's enemies before they get the chance to kill us. The inner life of modern man thus comes to a crashing conclusion. He must kill off in his imagination all the world save himself, to be left secure on a desert island of his own making, with nobody to admire, fear, or envy him at all. And these pages are the ingredients of the insights of Hegel, Freud, and Sartre. So kind of this idea that, we want to control everybody because we want their good opinions. And so therefore we're always kind of lashing out at everybody too, because we're always afraid that they're going to get us first, in a way. He also says
and there is hatred of private property is so odd to me, because he's claiming, well, the first person that fenced off property was started us all down this evil path of this utopian communism where everything is everybody's. But and of course it's the same problem with modern communist states, is that if you don't have ownership over something, you don't have a responsibility for it, and it's like the old saying, nobody washes a rental car. Because if it and I remember even when I was a teenager working at Sam's Club, they were always saying, take ownership over your area, and they don't mean it literally. It's not like I can box it all up and take it home, but you ownership is the concept of having responsibility for it, and so without private property, it's kind of back into Locke. That's the foundation for a just society, is that you're able to have your own stuff and you're able to add to it and support yourself and your family and be independent and self-sustaining. That's the real foundation of a just society. Not nobody can own anything, and the property. We're all at war with each other over the property, and
which is what he says here. He says the divide between the rich and poor prompts civil war, which is prevented by a social contract. And we'll get more into that idea, but he says this particular social contract that created, modern society is particularly evil. He says the rich proposed that they should continue to exploit the poor, and the poor must protect the rich's possessions and serve them. He says the modern state is built on this, as it secures property rights and allows the rich to exploit the poor. That's kind of why he says society is evil and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think he'd have a better point in French aristocracy, that time before the revolution, where it was a zero-sum game, and there were literally haves and have-nots. People were starving to death, and it was just too bad. It wasn't really a capitalist society where as they say, rising tide lifts all boats. So I don't know that they would have conceived of it being really possible to have a world of our abundance. And I wonder how that would have changed his philosophy, or even Marx. Well, Marx was kind of a weirdo, let his kids starve to death. So he probably would have been the same. But I wonder about that, because and of course, I guess maybe he wouldn't change his mind, because we have Marxists and dipshits all over this world that are blind to the bounty that has been created by regulated capitalism. Anyway, a little aside there.
Yes. We then move on to Emile, the next important work of Rousseau. He says, Rousseau was intoxicated with classical Republican view that the life of the active citizen was the good life, while also hating the modern world. And so he tried to combine those two ideas in Emile, which details how a young man named Emile is provided with an education that eliminates the misery of modern society by giving him the capacity to be happy while detaching him from modern politics. He says that if he finds himself in a republic where the laws are the laws of nature, then he should be an active and committed citizen, but otherwise he should live happily detached. So Rousseau's kind of setting up an impossible problem. He's like, if your country upholds all of these natural laws, which are, craziness about us being monkeys, essentially, then you can be an active and committed citizen. But if not, then you have to kind of live detached from modern politics, or you'll be miserable.
Yeah, I don't know how a society can exist with his views on natural state. I
Hmm.
mean, how do you have a society?
Yeah,
Period. I mean, but
yeah, doesn't make
it's a
sense.
utopia, so
Yeah, but
he can have his pretend world.
he says education ought to be given by nature as society corrupts. He says things, not persons, should teach the child. So we should learn pretty much entirely by experience. He says the dependence on things is consistent with freedom, but dependence on persons is slavery. He says Emile acquires moral ideas by experience in the same way he acquires understanding of the world. He says it's very natural to develop morality just by experiencing the world and things like that, which is an interesting idea, but I'm not entirely sure if it works out entirely, because I do think it is true that you can be more likely corrupted by people than by nature, I suppose, just because nature is somewhat neutral in terms of morality. But then again, I don't know how you can really derive a lot of morality, especially if you're on your own just exploring nature.
There is no neutral morality.
Mm,
Um, it is just not morality.
hmm. Yes,
Uh,
that's
so
that's
so
what I
you
mean.
know,
I didn't mean neutral morality. I mean it's neutral in that it does not have a morality.
but that's what. There is no not morality
You don't
for
think so?
humans. No, and
Mm,
in a natural state, you learn moral concepts. Uh, Many instances from society itself and how
mm-hmm,
you interact with people. And so to say that you would figure out right from wrong
mm-hmm,
just through experience, and you would be not as corrupted. I don't know that that's true,
yeah,
because if nobody's telling you it's wrong
mm-hmm,
to steal from the market, it's a lot easier
mm-hmm,
to steal than it is to grow something, or
yeah,
to make something. And so why wouldn't you do that?
mm-hmm,
So if you see people that are closer to the state of nature within a society, they're usually almost feral, with their morality,
mm-hmm,
which is might makes right, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make ends meet, and
mm-hmm,
it doesn't matter who gets hurt, because
yeah,
why would it matter to me?
mm-hmm,
It's better for me if I take your stuff.
yeah,
So if you don't have a moral code and it's just state of nature, then I think that's a recipe for immorality, but
mm-hmm,
it's not a recipe for lack of a moral
yeah.
code. You're gonna have one way or the other.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. I mean, nature is not going to guide you on the right path. I think you will still have your own moral ideas just based on what you experience in the world, but I don't think they'll be necessarily the right moral ideas. It'll just be what is most beneficial for you at the given time, I think, for the most
Right.
part. And I do think it is important for society to be there and kind of, coach people to be good people on whatever you define society as. But I
Well,
don't,
probably wouldn't be a bad idea to read the New Testament either.
yeah, that's true.
That might help with your morality, and maybe not fool around, almost your entire adult life, and then allow your children to die in some
Mm,
foundling hospital.
yes, yes,
Which he's closer to the state of nature than anything. Just abandon the kids.
yeah. I mean, it's most
I don't want to have.
beneficial for him at the moment, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't want to have that responsibility.
Yeah,
Anywho,
yes. But Emile was attacked for its religious elements because it was very hostile to institutionalized religion. It had sort of, deist undertones of just, worship some god, but not necessarily, the Christian God. But he says
right.
Rousseau also believed that men are strength and women are weakness, and education must emphasize these differences. Women should not receive a formal education, but be taught to please. I'm going to read here from the book. He says,
Wait a second.
characteristically,
Wait a second. This is
what?
this is like an example of a broken clock being right twice a day. But go ahead. No, I'm just joking. Just joking.
He says, characteristically, Rousseau could not quite make up his mind whether women were the weaker sex. They are physically weaker, but men's emotional dependency on them gave them a power hardly to be overestimated. Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women devoted a long chapter called Animadversions on some of the writers who have rendered women objects of pity bordering on contempt to the comprehensive demolition of Rousseau's views. What she argues, what Rousseau knew in his heart, was that he had produced a recipe for educating women to be duplicitous seductresses. He says, your only power is in, serving or pleasing men, and so you should be taught how to please them and nothing else, which is not the way, women should be educated. But he says Emile lives by this rational morality. He says happiness is found in sufficiency and not in excess, and he need not be an active citizen of a political community to live a good life. And I think the overall message there is true. I think it is good to be self-sufficient and not just dependent on society for everything. But I don't think you can achieve a moral state just sitting around out in nature, or the right moral state, I guess I should say, a state of good morals.
Right.
I think it's
And
important to have that foundation.
and he has an objection to institutional religion, but any religion is going to have rules.
Hmm.
It's by its very nature. You can have a general philosophy of life, I guess,
Hmm.
but you can't have, especially if you're trying to set up a utopia that has a common belief system. You're going to create a religion. You're either going
Hmm.
to adopt a religion or you have to create a religion, because you're
Yeah.
going to have some sort of belief structure that everybody's going to agree with, at least in some basic level, some main tenets. So to be hostile to
Hmm.
organized religion, well, then you're going to have a pluralistic society and not
Yeah.
have some sort of kind of vague deism
Hmm.
where everybody has to agree to to some general principles. Well, then
Hmm.
that's just a different religion.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
just a different useless religion to a certain extent. But
Yeah.
you still have to punish the blasphemers somehow, right? You
Oh,
didn't he advocate for people dying or getting killed for failing to follow the religion, or am I thinking of somebody else? It's
Yeah. No,
a.
this was him. Yeah,
Yeah,
he has
okay,
elements of that in here.
all right, very good. I
But
just want to make sure that he believes that people should be killed for not believing the right thing.
nice. Yeah, that is Rousseau. We then move into the social contract, which is, of course, the most famous of Rousseau's works. And it was an inquiry into the conditions under which a polity can rightly demand, and its subjects cannot rightly refuse, obedience to its laws. What is essentially a just government, and what role does society or do the people have in that? And the opening is very famous. Man was
Mm,
born free and is everywhere in chains. Again, going back to that idea of, natural man is free from everything, but now, with society, we've become, servants. But he says he doesn't know how this came to be, but he does know how this is legitimate. In what point, service to a higher authority becomes legitimate. He just says we don't really know at what point this happened, but we do know when it is good. He also says that no story about origins could determine a question about right, kind of making the point that, if my ancestors, signed their rights over to a king, why does that have any bearing on my life? And I think I agree with him to an extent there. For this, to be a functioning society, it has to be more than just a piece of paper that was signed, 400 years ago. It has to actually upkeep some bargains to the people.
yeah,
But he's,
I've been thinking. I think that's a really good point.
mm-hmm,
That we almost, and I'm going to segue into a topic nobody cares about. But in my practice of law, there's a little esoteric area of law that's subdivision law.
mm,
So when you buy into a subdivision, you have certain restrictions. Like in our subdivision, you can't have an above ground pool.
mm-hmm,
But everybody has to agree to the restrictions. So
mm-hmm,
it's usually set up by a developer, a sole developer, and he records the restrictions so that everybody who buys it from him, he's subdividing it. That's what's called subdivision,
mm-hmm,
from like 100 acres to, let's say, 100 different property owners. And so there is unanimity agreement of the restrictions, because he's selling it to people with those restrictions in place, and they have to
mm-hmm,
agree to that by buying the property, et cetera, et cetera. But then some restrictions have provisions where they lapse. Some of
mm-hmm,
them are like 40 years, some of them are 50 years, and they've been around so long that they have lapsed. And,
mm-hmm.
and the only way to get new restrictions on is if everybody unanimously agrees. And you can imagine how difficult it is just to get everybody to return a response, let alone to agree
Mm-hmm.
to not have an above ground pool, for example. And I was thinking, maybe we should have our constitution the same way. I mean, I know it would be really disruptive, and it's a horrible situation for people in a subdivision when they lapse because they can't
Mm-hmm.
enforce anything other than
Yeah.
general nuisance law or governmental restrictions. But we seem to have gotten far from what the Constitution was
Mm,
or believed to be back in 1789 or whatever,
mm-hmm.
um, because they would have never contemplated the level of government intervention that we have now.
Yeah.
Of course, you'd argue, well, maybe that's better. Um, and maybe it is, I don't know. But, especially in light, I always bring up the COVID lockdowns. It really kind of freaked me out with how compliant everybody was and how the government at all levels intruded on our lives without really a whimper in
Mm-hmm.
response from all of us. And so, maybe we should have like an expiration, to the
Hmm.
Constitution. They have to re-ratify it or draft a new one. Have a scheduled constitutional convention, because I mean we could still call one.
Yeah.
There's a procedure for calling one, but maybe we should have a deadline on the darn thing. We're
Hmm.
either signing up for it or not, and then have a deadline on that one.
Yeah.
We certainly could. You could have
Hmm.
an expiration date on the Constitution. There's no reason why you couldn't.
Yeah.
But
That's
but
interesting.
so and I didn't even really think of that until
Hmm.
I was reading the summary of his. I thought that's kind of interesting that that maybe every 20 years, because it's really another generation, or maybe 30
Hmm.
years. Why am I bound by the stupid Supreme Court decisions from, well, I'm 52, so 60 years ago?
Yeah.
Or some that were when I was young, like when was Miranda versus Arizona decided? I can't remember. I think it was in the 60s.
Hmm.
Stupid decision. Um, and and it was wrongly decided, and it is a complete. That's the one where you have to give Miranda rights to people
Yeah.
before you question them, and because people don't know that they don't have to talk to the police.
Hmm.
Well, there's not a person in the United States today that speaks English that can't tell you the Miranda warnings. That because they've seen it on TV a million times. You have a right
Hmm.
to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. Everybody can say it. Why do we have to say it to them?
Yeah.
If the police don't say it to somebody and they committed a murder,
Hmm.
and you say, "Hey, what you doing here?" They're in custody. What you been doing with all this blood on you? Well,
Hmm.
I just murdered my wife. Well, if they're in custody and I didn't Mirandize you, that confession doesn't come into evidence. That's Miranda.
Hmm.
So why are we still abiding by that stupidity?
Hmm.
Why are we doing all these things? Why do we have, so it makes a lot of sense that the people today that were not born when this Constitution was put in place, why are we bound by it?
Yeah. Hmm.
Only because it'd be too disruptive to not be bound by it, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, the other argument, I guess, would be that, well, we've inherited this great treasure of a constitution, and so it kind of runs with the land. I don't
Hmm.
know. What
I
are
don't
your
know.
thoughts?
I don't know. I don't think I'm in favor. I mean, I don't know how it would work, right? But I don't think it should just be like a democratic vote on like what should be in our Constitution now. Like, I think
Mhm.
that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, we just saw that in the Missouri Constitution, with marijuana being added to our Constitution. Regardless of anyone's opinions on the legality of marijuana, what is that doing in our Constitution? And of course, it had all kinds of other things in there and
Agreed.
nonsense and
We
stuff.
need to get rid of this damn constitution, write a new one. And by the way, there was a provision on the ballot
Hmm.
for Missouri Constitutional Convention,
Hmm.
which can be approved by the voters, and of course,
Yeah.
we decided not to.
Yeah. But I think generally people don't necessarily have the right intentions. Like I don't think it should be like a very democratic process, if that makes sense. Because then I mean we'll just get a constitution full of weed amendments. I think that's what it'll be. It'll just be, like, well, what do we want right now? Let's give everybody $5 million, and then that's gonna be in the Constitution and things like that. And like who would vote against that? I think you'd be stupid if you had the power to just give everybody $5 million. Why wouldn't you?
Well,
I don't know.
because it would impoverish everyone.
Well, of course, but I think the average voter would be like, "Well, yeah, let's just give everybody $5 million."
I don't think that's true.
You don't think that's?
I
I
don't.
just.
I don't. I don't think. I think if everybody knew, if you had a vote
Hmm.
and the vote was everybody gets $5 million, it's going to
Yeah.
fail. That's not going
Hmm.
to pass. You're going to get a plural. They're going to get a substantial minority that will vote for it.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it won't get votes, but I have a little more faith in the voters than maybe I
Hmm.
should. But
Yeah.
I think that's at least 60-40 no, because everybody will be like, wait a second, this guy in prison is going to get $5 million. It would be pretty easy to pit everybody against each other in a
Hmm.
campaign,
Yeah.
because you have a laundry list of horrible people.
Hmm.
If Donald Trump gets a $5 million, no, I don't. I'll forego my 5 million as long as he doesn't get 5 million.
Yeah. But I mean, my
And
point is,
besides, it's an economic disaster, and I think
yes.
there's some. Well, when the United States Constitution was adopted, it wasn't adopted democratically.
Yes. That's what I'm saying.
There were the member states
Hmm.
voted to approve it, but they didn't vote to approve it democratically. They did it through their representatives.
Yeah. I mean,
So
but that's what I'm
Republic.
saying. Because I think the problem you want to solve is like government overreach, right?
No, I
Because
just want
that's
to start over from scratch, throw it all away.
but that's the point I'm making. If we want to make a constitution that has, that gives the government less power, we can't let the government themselves vote on that. Because I mean, I think we've seen that already with, we still don't have any sort of amendment for term limits or anything for Congress and stuff like that. And I think
We
the
got them in
majority
Missouri. We
we got
got
them
them
in
in
Missouri,
Missouri.
but I mean
Yes.
nationally, I think the vast majority of voters would be in favor of that. I think
Mhm.
would be in favor of term limits, but of course, Congress won't give themselves term limits because they have a nice cushy job and stuff like that. So I don't think it can be just the government themselves, our representatives, voting on it, but I also don't think it should be entirely democratic either. I think it's just such a problem of who do you select to make a new constitution?
Yeah, of course, those are practical issues.
Yes.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm not trying to discount them. I think Rousseau's point is that's all well and good,
Hmm.
but why is the present generation bound by all these rules? You didn't
Yeah.
agree to it.
Yeah. I mean that's true, and I think we'll get into his
Let's have a
theories here shortly.
revolution. Let's start it today. Who's up? Who's ready for this revolution?
Oh boy. Going back to Rousseau, going back to the book, he makes a good point here. He says a person who lives in a foreign country has to follow all of its rules, and not just some. And the foreigner also expects that as long as he behaves properly, he will be treated decently. He says, however, only citizens have the right to a say in the making of the laws. He says we're also not bound to provide foreigners with the same legal protections as citizens if we expect that they might harm us. Which
This
is,
is bizarro talk in today's American
yeah.
society. None
Well,
of
I
that
thought
is
it
true.
was, yeah.
None of it is true in the United States of America. They have legal
Mhm,
protections. They're getting votes. They don't have to abide by our rules. That in
mhm,
California, in some jurisdictions, they're decriminalizing certain types of offenses when committed by a
mhm,
foreigner, a foreign national, that are crimes if you are an American,
yeah.
because they are trying to avoid deporting people or having people deported for those offenses. So if I committed, say, a DWI or some of those offenses in certain jurisdictions, I, as an American citizen, get punished, but the foreigners aren't. I mean,
Yeah.
it's insane. But
Hmm.
this was written, I think, before the insanity really took hold, which is like really in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
But I agree
Yeah.
with the principles that he's
Yeah.
espousing in here, but they would be
Hmm.
revolutionary in some areas of our country.
Yeah. Well,
Isn't that amazing?
I thought it was especially topical with a certain WNBA star who was just traded for, an infamous arms dealer. What do they call him? The butcher of something. That's who we traded for
Um,
Brittany Griner.
yeah, what was he called? They had a good
So,
nickname for him.
something to do with butcher, I think.
Hmm.
But essentially, very, very dangerous man because Brittany Griner was arrested in Russia for bringing weed into the country.
I thought he was
Which
the
I mean,
merchant of death. Was he
the
a
Merchant
merchant
of
of
Death.
death?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
because
I
he
must be
sold a
thinking of
lot of
somebody else.
death. He sold a
Yes.
lot. No, he sold arms.
Yeah, he sold a lot of
Yeah,
arms.
he,
But it's
he changed the
that sort of idea.
he
Maybe if
changed
you're
like the
going,
tribal fights to AK-47 wars. That's what
but
I
I mean,
mean.
maybe if you're going into another country that doesn't allow, marijuana, don't bring marijuana into the country that doesn't allow marijuana. I feel like that's kind of an easy rule to follow. But
Well, I mean, beyond that, and I'll say this: she is an American citizen,
yes,
no
I'm not
matter how
saying she
much.
should not have been brought back to America. Like,
Yeah,
absolutely, bring our citizens here.
and I think that there should be some pressure applied because she's an American citizen. And I think there is a value to citizenship that a lot of liberals or leftists don't agree with.
Hmm.
We are a special class. Period.
Yeah.
Too bad if you're not a citizen, you don't have the same rights and privileges.
Hmm.
Having said that, if you go over to Russia to make a living
Hmm.
under their legal system, such as it is, you have assumed a certain amount of risk,
Yeah.
especially when they're at war. Okay, they're invading another country. Everybody knew they were gearing up for an invasion. I'm trying to remember when she was arrested. I don't know if it was before the invasion or after,
Hmm.
but certainly anybody who's going to Russia to work is part of a corrupt system because you're getting
Hmm.
paid by some sort of oligarch is running. And
Yeah.
who is paying for who is watching women's basketball in Russia? Who is watching that? And what are they paying? And nobody's ever said how much money she made and who's paying her.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot of that should be put in the equation of how much effort we go to get somebody out. Like it's kind of like if somebody goes up to Mount Everest
Hmm.
to climb up there and they get stuck. well, how much are we going to risk to save that life? Somebody obviously put themselves in danger. And it's not that level, but it's darn close.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to an area that is known to have unlawful arrests on a
Yeah.
regular basis, what are you doing going over there? And don't complain too much when you get nabbed,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if she really had the drugs. I mean, if she
Yeah.
eventually admitted to it in court, but I think it was probably under pressure.
Yeah.
So who knows, what the truth is. If I were a gambleman, I'd say, yeah, she's stupid enough to bring the stuff over there, arrogant enough. But yeah, I mean, she just has a special classification because she
Mm-hmm.
is a African American lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
professional athlete, and so it's like a trifecta of importance for the media and
Mm-hmm.
for Biden. But yeah, I think Rousseau would be on my side and maybe on your side,
Yeah.
saying that you got to live by their rules. You chose to live there. You're a foreign national, and even if it's completely unjust, tough cookies for you.
Yeah. Yeah. We then move on to another
That was a good
section.
rant. That was a
That was
pretty
a
good
good
rant.
rant. Yes, thank
Yes.
you for the rant. We move to another section about the pacts that we make, essentially, with our authorities, and what right they have to make these pacts. He says, "Might does not make right. To be a people comes from an agreement, and this agreement creates civil society." He says here, "We seek a form of association that defends and protects the person and possessions of each associate with all the common strength, and by means of which each person, joining forces with all, nevertheless obeys himself alone and remains as free as before." So that's essentially his definition of what a government generally is: an association of people. We're all sort of subject to it, and we all seek to protect each other. Bottom line is Rousseau's definition. He says, political obligation must be self-imposed. A legitimate state is created when we place ourselves and our possessions under its authority on the same terms from all. So very egalitarian, imposed by us alone. He says, we create a contract in which we give ourselves wholly to the sovereign, creating a moral body with absolute authority of all members. And this moral body is an entity with a will. And this will is the general will, and so it aims at the good of the community. The contract only binds anyone if everyone is bound without reservation. So we have to give ourselves entirely to this thing that has in its purpose, the good of the whole community.
And
However,
I don't know if I follow that. Do you follow that reasoning? I don't know.
I mean, I think it makes sense on a certain level. I don't think it's guaranteed that whatever sovereign we create will have a good general will. I
Well,
think
that's true. Right.
I think when people are making a government, they do it with the idea that this government will make a general will. But like you're saying, with this, incredible overarching, federal power that we have, that is not what the founding fathers intended and things like that. And so I think it's, I don't think the government has our best interests in mind at all times, but I do think that principle is there when forming a government.
Well, yeah, I hope so. But I was more along the lines of wondering what you thought about that everyone
Mm.
had to agree to be bound without reservation in order for it to be a legitimate government.
Um, yeah, I don't think it's 100%, I will agree to everything that this body does. And he does outline some examples of, how we can get out of this pact essentially.
Well,
But I
it's not an agreement that everything that happens in the future is going to be you agree with. I don't
mhm,
think. I think what he's saying is that when the government is formed
mhm,
with the consent of the people, everyone has to be bound to it without reservation.
mm,
And I don't think that's true because I don't think you're ever going to get everybody
yeah,
to agree to any sort of government,
mhm,
no matter how benign or how intrusive,
yeah,
or how even if it's a libertarian's paradise, because there's some people that say, no, I don't want a libertarian
mhm,
government. I want something that's a little more assertive and will protect us
yeah,
from different dangers. So I think that's kind of a more of an extreme
mhm,
uh, um, ideal, I
mhm.
guess,
I
impractical.
think it has to please enough people that it functions. I
True.
think.
Yes.
I
Right.
think that's what it should be. It's not everybody without reservation. It's just enough people so that it exists, I think.
Right. Has to have a certain amount of legitimacy
Hmm.
with I'd say, I guess I don't know how I define it, but certainly a super majority,
Hmm. Yeah,
not just a bare
absolutely.
majority.
He also says that there are opportunities for us to disobey this sovereign. He says the sovereign only exists because it is authorized by us all, and only so far as it embodies the general will. He says to attack an individual is not an act of the sovereign, and not endorsed by the common will, but is a simple assault by particular persons. He says, if the government is going out of its way to just attack people, if we can say that, this is not the action of the general will, we don't have to obey them. If the government singles the two of us out because it doesn't like us and tells us, hey, go to jail, we don't have to do that because it's not an act of the general will. He also says that a well-constituted state will not behave badly. He says the body politic or the state has two aspects: is the sovereign when making law and the state when implementing the laws. He says as citizens, they make law. As subjects, they obey the laws once made because the people make the laws. They thus obey themselves and remain as free as before. So he's kind of saying, we're not losing freedom. We're just, placing restrictions on ourselves because it came from us originally. We're not losing any freedom as we had before.
Yeah, but we're seeing time and time again the rules don't apply to the rulers,
even
in our modern society.
Absolutely.
But it's a nice thought.
Mm-hmm. He says it's unclear how law and morality relate. He says morality is occasionally equated with the general will, but elsewhere Rousseau states that morality is the rules we would want to follow as humans, while laws are what we follow as members of a particular society. So kind of, narrowing the scope of things. Morality is what we do as humans. Laws is what we do in a society. He says the point of creating a society is that the right will be backed by sanctions. This says it makes guarantees that others obey the laws we agree upon, and these are provided by the threat of punishment. But he did say that he has issues even describing punishment, so he kind of glosses it over. He says, his heart, let me see if I can find the quote here. He says, I feel my heart murmuring, he says, and stops when he's talking about, what is just in punishment, which I think is just a cop-out.
Yeah. I wonder how much his heart murmured with the death of his 5 kids he abandoned.
That's a good question.
I'm so, I just view him like some woke dipshit in San Francisco. Oh, my heart murmured for they even conceive of punishment for people that broke the law. Don't you have like 5 kids? Where are they? I don't know. I think they're dead. That doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about.
Oh, man. But he does say that he comes close to the idea that lawful punishment is inflicted on ourselves by ourselves. So kind of a government, created by the people, punishes the people, therefore it's lawful. But then we get into the idea of liberty, according to Rousseau.
So wait a second. Did you skip over the description that he believes that if you deviate from the religious commitments, you may be put to death? Did you see that?
I might have glossed over that. Yes.
That was page 563. Did I get ahead of you or am I behind you?
No, you were behind me. I did skip over that. But yes.
Yeah, it was right before he was talking about here his heart murmuring about punishing people. But you know what? If you don't follow our civic religion, you're going to hell, Bister. I'm sending you there. Although I don't know. Do you think he believed in heaven and hell? I don't know.
I mean, if he was just kind of a vague deist, probably not.
Yeah.
But then we go into liberty. He says it is possible to combine freedom and law, and he points out 3 kinds of freedom. And freedom has to meet the requirement that we are not told what to do, nor subject to arbitrary whims, and it also ensures that we are governed reasonably and not by whim alone. He says natural man enjoys natural freedom. He prescribes no laws to himself and is only obedient to his appetites. So because there are no laws, he is naturally free. But the man of correct moral attachments enjoys moral freedom. He truly prescribes laws to himself that are good, and he is governed by reason and not whim. But a man in a lawful republic enjoys both civic freedom as well as moral freedom. Enjoys civic freedom as well as moral freedom and whatever natural freedom local conditions allow. So civic freedom is kind of the combination of the two. We're free in that, there aren't really very many laws, but we're also following, just laws that are there created for the intent of morality. And he says, the popular republic alone can kind of achieve this idea, which he kind of equates with the Roman libertas. And he says we need politics because of our conflicting interests, and our common interests make politics possible. He says the general will is indivisible, infallible, and omnicompetent. This is a weird sort of just, playing on definitions here. He says for a body politic or a general will to exist, there must be a point where consensus is made on what needs to be done. Therefore, it's indivisible. There has to be some sort of ultimate power there that decides on things. By definition, it is therefore indivisible. He also says that the general will is an idealization. It is the urge for the body politic to thrive and flourish, and therefore it is by definition the bearer of the right answer, but individuals may still be wrong, sort of interpreting what the general will is, so therefore it's infallible. The general will is always right. We just get it wrong sometimes, which I think is just again, sort of a cop-out here. He says, well, it's just by definition right. We're just wrong sometimes. And so it's like, but this is the foundation of sort of your political theory. I think you have to kind of account for, when we're wrong about it, but
Yeah,
whatever.
it's almost like those definitional, self-proving definitions or
Mm-hmm.
something. It also reminded me of like ancient Greeks would go up to the what are they called? They're like soothsayers or
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about that they would
Oracles?
oracles. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the oracles, and if the oracles statement of what was going to happen was wrong, they just kind of interpreted it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't
Yeah.
really listen to me.
Yeah.
That's what kind of his theory is, that the state ultimately can't be wrong. We just
Mm-hmm.
didn't listen to the general will correctly, which is just a recipe for disaster to give that kind of moral authority to
Mm-hmm.
a civic organization that has the right to arrest and
Mm-hmm.
prison and murder you.
Yeah.
Execute you.
It also kind of reminds me of one of the questions Matt Walsh asked in "What is a Woman?" Where he's interviewing somebody, some sort of gender studies professor, I think it was, but he says, well, of course, the title question, what is a woman? Of course, she responds, well, somebody who identifies as a woman.
Right.
Well, okay, what is that? He says, well,
Yes.
that's not for me to decide. It's like, well, then what is a woman? What is it at all? And I think
Right.
that's these circular definitions here, just kind of a way to get out of actually answering the question.
Right. Well, that's a hard
Uh,
question to answer, but
yeah.
I guess he took a stab at it.
He then goes on to say that because a society has many common interests and it may be hard to know what policy best promotes the common interest on certain issues, a simple and egalitarian society is the only one that can determine common interest with certainty. So we have to keep our societies small. We have to keep them equal among people in order for them to function. And I kind of agree with that idea that I think it would be much
Absolutely.
easier with a very much smaller society to agree on what
Yeah,
is
and
right.
he makes a really good point on that, where that the society has some shared interests and some non-shared interests,
Mm-hmm.
and the smaller the government's imposed sphere is, the better, because you're gonna it's almost like you have to figure out the concentric circles, the circles that include both that all the general will, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't all agree on, and
Mm-hmm.
that should be left alone. So I think he's onto something there.
Yeah. He also goes on to say that Rousseau's preferred form of government was an elective aristocracy, but again, this does not answer how we discover the general will. He's very vague about that. I think very similar to Marx's, communism. It just is a thing that happens. The general
Right.
will is a thing that happens. But he says everyone whose interests are at stake must have a voice, and a decision must be taken by a majority vote. This is an interesting. He says, it's a two-step process to kind of, have a society function. This is kind of his ideal sort of functioning. He says the first stage produces an answer to the question at hand. So it's a question of do we invade this country? And if the first stage says yes, then there's a second stage, which voters again vote whether they are happy with the answer. So it's kind of you make the decision and then you confirm the decision, which I can see being very useful if there's multiple decisions, if it's not just a yes or no. Kind of getting a range of choices, and whichever wins the first round, then we vote on it again to see if we actually agree with it, and if not, we go back to the drawing board with the first decision. Yeah, you have no thoughts on that, I
No, I
guess.
mean it seems like it's duplicative, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, why do you have representatives? I mean, I guess you're narrowing the choices
Yeah.
available for the plebiscite to
Mm-hmm.
ratify. You say, well, we're going to narrow it down to these options, and then you pick, which is, I guess, has some usefulness, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't
Yes.
see how it's practical.
Mm-hmm. We then get a very short section on Rousseau's state, sort of asking, when is a government legitimate and things like that. He says Rousseau answers the question how anyone is really entitled to exercise power, and answers essentially by saying that they get it by being entitled to it under the rules of a state that is constitutionally beyond reproach and such as we would wish, as rational, moral, modestly self-interested creatures concerned with our families, but also with humanity at large to join. So sort of just an idea of, well, it's based on whatever laws we have set up. You kind of have to have a government first in order to create a government in a weird way, or to elect a
Right.
leader to decide who has power. So kind of a circular thinking there. But then we move in to this part on sort of Rousseau's impact, and he kind of answers that question. He uses a semi-mythical figure to turn a group into an actual people, and this is the idea of the legislator. So similar to earlier thoughts we've had, where people think you need a firm founder of a society for it to function. People point to Moses, to Romulus, things like that.
Right.
But he says what legitimates the legislator's vision is acceptance by the people. So such a person will need to appeal to divine authority or exert a charismatic authority over certain followers to give them legitimacy in the eyes of the people and have them approve of what he does. And I think there's some truth to that. I think, if you are a single person or a couple different people who are trying to set up a government, you need the people to support you. I think it's,
True.
completely legitimate if you're just like, okay, me and my friends are going to set up a country, it doesn't make any difference. But I think you definitely need to be a charismatic person and have some sort of more reasoning behind you just than a good idea, I think.
Yeah, and he goes on to talk about that it's not the laws that keep the society or the state going. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a common morality or common a belief system
Mm-hmm.
that really keeps the society or the state in place.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really true because if you don't have a buy-in, I guess you'd say from at least the vast majority of people, then it undermines the legitimacy of the government, no matter what laws you
Mm-hmm.
impose.
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm. I think goes back into his idea of civic religion. He says the possession of a strong collective morality is more important than possession of good laws. He says if the people agree on their morals, then that's more important than just having good laws in the books. And I think that is
Did
that
I
is
just say
true.
that? I just
You,
said that.
you did just say that, did you? I must have tuned you out.
You just
Um,
dozed off for a
I
second.
must have. I must have. But I think that's true. But his way of getting there is not good. He was very happy with the Roman censor morum, which was an official who punished offenses against good morals, even if they were not illegal actions. So
Yep.
somebody says, you've been a bad person, off to jail or to be executed. And he says there should be a profession of faith for all people, which was, he says, the profession of faith is unexceptionable. Although it is deist rather than Christian, positively it is belief in the existence of a powerful, intelligent, beneficent, prescient, and provident divinity, the life to come, the happiness of the just, the punishment of the wicked, the sanctity of the social contract and the law. And negatively, that intolerance is not to be tolerated. He provides an alarming coda when he says that anyone who first professes that faith and then behaves as though he does not believe it should be executed as a traitor. So a very binding profession of faith there. And then,
I
of
think
course,
I think that's a great quote. Intolerance is not to be tolerated. It's brilliant in its stupidity.
yes, it, it
But
really is.
I wrote on the margins of this page where he says Roman Catholicism
Mhm.
is a terrible basis. I put uh-oh. Of course,
Yep.
that inspired the murder of all the nuns and all the religious people in the French Revolution. Man,
Hmm.
they executed nuns, man,
Yeah.
like large groups
Hmm.
just because they're nuns.
Yeah. He's another one that really does not like Christianity here, especially Roman Catholicism, because
Doesn't
as you
like the
said,
Catholics. Yeah,
terrible, terrible basis because it splits loyalties. We've heard that
right,
before. Are you
right,
really loyal
right,
to the Pope or are you loyal to the state? But he also just doesn't like Christianity at all. He
right.
says it's a religion of the heart, not the public square. He says true Christians would not resist evil rulers as their concerns would be with the next world. And so, Christianity, terrible basis for public morality.
Right.
I just think he had bad experiences with Christians. He
I think
says
he has a
the
bad experience with Christians saying, maybe you shouldn't let your kids die. Maybe you should get a job and support your family. Uh,
maybe that might be the root cause
there's
here.
probably some cousin that's like, hey, what happened to Junior? Well, I gave him up to the Foundling Hospital. What about Junior? No, oh yeah, him too. What about the girl? Her too. I think maybe God would probably want you to take care of your kids instead of, allowing them to die like that. You bigot, you Catholic bigot. I
Exactly.
just,
That is an
I
actual
just,
conversation that
that
you
is
still have.
exactly what happened, but with French accents. I should have done it with French accents. Sacre
Exactly.
bleu. Oui,
That's
oui, oui.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Um,
Croissant.
are those the only French words you know?
um, I don't know what's the French word for surrender. They seem to be fluent in that. Hey-o.
But to kind of conclude here, Rousseau says that the modern world did not provide the political commitments that he thought the classical city-state would have for us. He says we might throw away our arts, commerce, social life, science, and technology and recover our morals. So so just because we're progressing, physically and intellectual and things like that, does not mean that we are better off morally. But he says the French revolutionaries thought that a strong central state and innumerable local entities would solve this problem of not having the right morals and things like that. To end by reading from the book, he says they were wrong to think that the virtues professed by the Romans would make much headway in modern France, and they suffered for the error. Although their American predecessors, who also read Rousseau with interest, were far more successful in instituting the first modern republic, they profited from working under much more propitious social, economic, and political conditions than their French counterparts. Their ambitions were not as different as commentators sometimes suggest, nor was their success inevitable. That is leading, of course, into the next chapter on the American founding, which should be a very interesting chapter for us, given that we are Americans. We probably know a little bit more about this topic than we do about some others.
Yeah, but I really, really, well, maybe I shouldn't disagree so much with that statement that the ambitions of the French Revolution were not as different
Mm,
to the American Revolution as some people say. There were foundational differences
hmm
about equality.
hmm
The French Constitution, the French thinkers at the time gave lip service to individual rights.
hmm
They were very much more collective rights, and it was liberty, fraternity, equality, but it was all on paper. It
hmm
really didn't have any meaning, and they didn't really care about the individual.
hmm
There's this collective nonsense,
I feel like they did a lot of performative stuff
correct,
in a way
correct,
because I mean
correct,
they changed the calendar because they're like we're all about rationality, we're all about reason and things like that. So we need a reasonable calendar and things like
right.
that. And it's like, what does that have anything to do with anything? I
Yeah,
think
that was
it's
that wasn't immediately,
mhm.
So
There's a
there
little
were
ways
it
in.
was after a couple purges they
Hmm
got to that point, and that's why the counter revolution is called the Thermidor, because that was the
hmm
name of the date or the week or month or whatever. I think it was a month, Thermidor,
hmm
and it just happened that that's when they finally got Robespierre.
hmm
He was such a danger to his own co-conspirators. They finally said, we've had enough,
hmm
and we really need an emperor.
Oh, good.
Which is eventually what happened. We got Napoleon. I mean,
Napoleon. Yeah.
Napoleon was a direct descendant of Robespierre's revolution for equality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all powerful single man rule.
hmm I'm sure we'll
Ironic.
get more into that, probably the chapter after that.
Yeah.
But what do you think of Rousseau overall, his ideas?
Yeah. I mean, I liked a lot of it.
Hmm
Kind of inspired me to start thinking about a termination date for a constitution, which I hadn't
hmm
really thought of it before, which is really dangerous, as you mentioned.
hmm
It's a lot of interesting things. I have a hard
Yeah.
time getting around despicable characteristics in the
hmm
writer. I
Yeah.
do have a difficult. Obviously, I've made several comments about it, but I have that kind of prejudice. But once I learned that the person is just a horrible human being, it's hard for me to really buy into any of their philosophy. I have to kind of overcome that, and in
hmm
spite of those thoughts, pay attention to what they're
hmm
saying, because I
Yeah.
just feel like if you don't care about your own kids dying, I should look askance at what your moralizing is,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe logically it doesn't make any sense, but
hmm
that's I'm hung up on it, I guess is what I'm saying. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of a social contract. I think it's
Mhm.
definitely important for the people to give some sort of, eh, you know, sort of ability for the government to act. Like I think that's important to acknowledge that it's not just the government does whatever it wants. And so for there to be some sort of agreement, some sort of pact, some sort of contract, like he says, I think that is good. How that would actually work, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea because I mean, changing the Constitution, very, very dangerous. I think. I think it's better off if we just leave it as it is, and not have these deadlines on it, I suppose.
Right.
But I disagree with all of his sort of more social theory. I don't think we're just molded by society. I think society has an impact on us. We're certainly formed by it in a way, but that does not mean that it is responsible for all of our actions ever.
Right.
We
Yeah.
are responsible for our own actions at the end of the day. It is us. It is our free will. It is not just what somebody said to me on the side of the road 10 years ago. That was part of my society. He made me mad 10 years ago, and
Mhm.
now I'm a terrible person in the future. I know that's a
Right.
simplification, but I still think it's still we're responsible for our own actions,
Right.
100%.
Yeah, and I think we would benefit as a country if we just amended the Constitution from time to time. Like
Yeah.
throw the term limits in there, go through the process.
Mhm.
Show the people, because I mean, when's the last time we amended the Constitution? I
It
mean,
was the
there was
90s, wasn't it?
there oh there was something. Yeah, I guess the
The
last one
27th.
was that the succession, the presidential succession, the 27th,
No.
because they
Well, yeah,
changed it
maybe.
because they had to change it in Nixon era. I
Mm.
think. And that kind of got expedited because they had issues with the succession and the power of the vice president. I think that might be the last one. I should know this. I'm a
Yeah, let me
lawyer.
look it up. I feel like we've had this exact conversation on the podcast before. Let me check.
We
Let me.
talked about the last state to be ratified,
We did do
when that
that.
was. I remember that was pretty recently. But really on a
Oh,
content.
it's the compensation, the pay for people in Congress, 27th.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
who cares about that?
yeah,
So
1992.
I mean, the last really contentious one that I can think of was probably prohibition. Don't you think there was really fought
Probably.
over?
Mm-hmm.
Back in the '70s, there was the Equal Rights Amendment that almost got passed. It was kind of funny. If you should read a little bit about the commentary, and one of the people that were against it was Phyllis Schlafly, who's based here in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
But they were warning, and it was funny because the people advocating for it said, "Well, that will never happen." No, but that's crazy talk, because they were saying if you pass the Equal Rights Amendment, you're going to have men and women using the same bathroom. And I just laugh and think about, because it was thought of as a crazy conspiracy
Mm-hmm.
theory that would never happen. Why are you trying to scare people from supporting this? And here we are without the Equal Rights Amendment, we got the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of funny how things work out.
Yeah,
But
it's crazy.
but I think it would be a good idea to have, like, to push through term limits.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get that done. And because I think the vast majority of people agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have to overcome the current power structure. But if you get some of the younger people, like your generation, really should be in favor of it. My
Mm-hmm.
generation too, in a sense, because we have nothing but geriatrics running the country now.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so the younger people, your generation, should really be in favor of the term limits, especially the people that are like just gotten in Congress or just getting into Congress. As you get older, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit older, because it opens up opportunities.
Yeah.
Because if you have term limits, then all those people that are stuck in there and clogging up the stream, you bounce them out, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can run for that office.
Yep.
Maybe you're not senator, but you can run for congressman, and that senate spots can be opened up. And the great thing about term limits are they're scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
So just like we know that the president only has a maximum of 8 years, because there is a term limit for the president,
Yeah.
we should know when the Supreme Court justices, there should be a mandatory retirement age of 70, and that should be in the
Mm-hmm.
same amendment, because Missouri has it. Judges can't
Yep.
serve after 70. But if you have that, then okay, if I elect this president, that president is going to appoint 3 justices, because in the next 4 years, 3 of them hit 70. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's always a chance people will die or resign. But the same is true for senators and congressmen. So, like, right now, there's somebody sitting in their office figuring out, somebody just got elected state rep,
Mm-hmm.
and they're thinking, oh, okay, well, they have a maximum of 8 years to serve as a state rep, and then you can do 8 years in the Senate. So they know in 8 years from now, this new state rep will not be serving there, and you'll be
Mm-hmm.
running for an open seat no
Yeah.
later than in 8 years. And that calculation does go on. And so for people that are younger and are really trying to get involved in the system, it provides, the claim about it was that it provides uncertainty, because you have new people coming in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually does provide certainty, because then you're certain when your term's going to end. Then you better hustle, because if you have stuff you want to get done, you got to get it done in 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to that, and I think it'd be beneficial to everybody to amend the Constitution. It'd be great for the abortion, the people that want to kill babies. If they really believe in that, they ought to try to amend the Constitution. And they're acting like they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do it because a majority of people don't want to just kill babies.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can amend the Constitution to show, to establish term limits, which is contentious, not everybody agrees with that. That'll shows them, put up or shut up. You want
Yep.
this as a constitutional right, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, shut up about it, because it's
Yeah.
not a constitutional right. And then it really would have, I think, a calming influence on a lot of these disputes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could say, well, we think free speech should be regulated. Well, then amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
Do it,
Mm-hmm.
or shut up. Or
Yeah.
move out, or whatever, because
Yeah.
you signed up for this deal. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's another rant. That was a bonus rant.
Well, I think that rant is kind of my answer to your earlier question of, should we just get rid of the Constitution? I think no. I think it should be, I don't know, necessarily easier to amend the Constitution, but it should be happening more often. People should be trying to do it more often. And I think that's the solution to kind of updating, with the times. If we're really bound to this Constitution that was written, 300 years ago, I think the answer is, well, have we tried to amend it? If there's things that we don't like about it, why don't we change those specific things without getting rid of the whole Constitution, trying to figure out how we're going to make a new one, how we're going to get people to agree on it, who's making the decisions there. I think the solution is amending it.
That's a good point. That's a good
Yes.
point. And I would not make it easier, because it really
Yes.
has to, because like you said, in Missouri, it's become too easy. It's just a
Mhm.
referendum. You have to have a majority vote once you get it on
Yes.
the ballot. And then, before you know it, you're adding eight pages of the Constitution about pot laws. And 15 years from now, the people are going to sour on marijuana. It's going to
Mhm.
happen
Yeah.
because, well, I don't want to go into, that's another rant. But it's not a wonder drug.
Mhm.
I don't think it was a crime of the century. I don't know anybody did of my generation think that, but it's not a panacea, and it has a lot of negative side effects.
Mhm.
And when you pass these kind of um, rights, to use it, you're really encouraging it.
Mhm.
So it's tough. It's tough, but the world's going to sour. It'll probably end up causing us to have a constitutional convention in Missouri,
Mhm.
because they keep adding the BS
Mhm.
provisions to a constitution that really should be statutes that can
Yeah.
be amended by the legislature once if we evaluate how the law affects society. We can amend a law a lot easier than the Constitution. And
Yeah.
it's not constitution. They have a constitutional right of who the license holders are for marijuana dispensaries.
Mhm.
Do we really have to have that in the Constitution? No.
Yeah. Of
That's not
course
a
not.
general principle. But yeah, I think you're right. And I think the amendment is probably the best way to that way. If you do it on a fairly regular basis, you don't should do it every year, but at least generationally, you should have an amendment to the Constitution on an important topic. That
Mhm.
way, everybody kind of signs up
Yeah.
for the rest of it, because you only amended this part of it. Well,
Mhm.
then I guess you're agreeing to everything else by implication,
Yeah,
because
that's true.
otherwise you'd amend 90% of it.
Yeah. Hmm.
Amen, brother. I'm with you.
Yes.
You
All
convinced me.
right. Do we have any other closing thoughts we want to talk about?
I have about 5 more rants, but I'll hold them
I
myself. I'll
bet.
save them.
All right. Well, this has been season 4, episode 16, I think. I've forgotten the episode number since the start of the episode. This has been a long one. I believe
Have
episode
we
16.
have we gotten any comments on our podcasts? I have not looked them up. Have we? You
I
giggled.
don't believe so. I don't
Okay.
believe so. So that's
Hmm.
why I was laughing, because so far our competition has been unsuccessful. But we are still having a t-shirt competition. You can win a very cool t-shirt that has Joseph Campbell's face on the back of it and a quote about what it means to be a true hero. You just have to leave a review on our podcast and let us know when you've left that review. We'll be picking the most interesting review. You don't have to rank us highly. You don't have to give us a good review, just the most interesting. And we'll select the most interesting review. So leave a review, Apple Podcast Republic. There's a bunch of places you can leave reviews. And we will reach out to us once you've left that review, either on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions or at our email, unlimitedopinionspodcast@gmail.com. And then we will pick the most interesting one. We'll send you a t-shirt completely free of charge, no payment necessary to get that t-shirt.
Nice.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been season 4, episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions, where we talked about Rousseau and Brittany Griner and marijuana and amending the Constitution for a very long time. But I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
This has been Unlimited Opinions.
Excellent.
That was a long episode. What was that,
Well, I
like
apologize.
hour
I
and a
have a
half?
lot of things to
You
say.
did have a
Was it
lot of
really
things to
that
say.
long?
We
Jesus.
started, yeah, probably before 6:45, and it is now, or quarter to 6. It is now 7:15.
It
So
is. That's a big topic, the
it is a
Rousseau.
big topic with Rousseau, but American founding next episode.
Yeah, that should be a good one.
Mhm.